And in practice, organizations are particularly focused on performative accountability, showing afterwards that you've reached the goals you've planned beforehand, especially demonstrated by figures. But a lot of organizations have experienced that not all communication matters can be captured by measurement and figures. I think that goes for you as well. Therefore, more and more organizations also pay attention to decisional accountability, which means that you describe and evaluate the processes that lead to the result of communication activities, products, decisions, and policies. The other two are, well, it's obvious that during the whole process of communication planning, we have to pay attention to social accountability, which is more or less about ethics, and professional accountability, which is about the view you have on communication. A last theoretical remark I would like to make about accountability of communication on a more strategic level is that it's important to distinguish between organization level, department or project level and individual level. Because very often I speak with communication directors who are being asked, why are there so many communication advisors in your department? And the second question always is, what are they actually doing? And then the last question is, if you're lucky, where does all the effort lead to? You cannot answer that question if you haven't thought about how communication contributes to the organization objectives and how these are translated into specific communication goals. And last but not least, what communication expertise you need in order to reach these objectives. An evaluation instrument which is of great help if you would like to evaluate your communication policy on a strategic level, and you can see it on the slide, is the Communication Balance Scorecard. Many of you probably are familiar with the Balance Scorecard of Cathelijne and Norton. Are you anyway? Who's familiar with the Balance Scorecard of Cathelijne and Norton? Okay. 2 or 3? Okay. The Balance Scorecard of Cathelijne and Norton provides management with a dashboard for monitoring the organization's financial perspective, internal business processes, client and learning and growth perspective. And Marita Vos, she is a Dutch scientist who's now a professor in Finland, has translated the Balance Scorecard into a Balance Scorecard for communication. And this slide gives you an overview of the subjects that are covered in the scorecard, divided into 4 communication domains, which you see on the horizontal line above, and 5 dimensions. And for public organizations, these domains are corporate communication, policy communication, internal communication, and organization of communication. On the left, you see the dimensions that are being evaluated in the scorecard, and those are clarity, environmental focus, consistency, responsiveness, and effectiveness and efficiency. So you see that if we talk about accountability of communication management, there are more dimensions to evaluate than just effectiveness and efficiency. If you use the Balance Scorecard, it consists of a questionnaire with 20 pages of questions on indicators that relate to the domains and dimensions. For instance, if we look at the domain of corporate communications and evaluate clarity, we have to answer questions about the positioning of the organization. You can go through the whole overview, of course. The results of the Balance Scorecard measurement can be demonstrated by figures or colors. And this is an example of that. In this example, the colors refer to a result. On a scale of 1 to 10, green is a score above 7, orange between 5 and 7, and red below 5, which means insufficient, of course. By the way, an insufficient score does not necessarily mean that you are going to focus on that subject in your communication strategy. But we'll discuss that later, I guess. So, during the years I've worked with the Balance Scorecard for communication, which is actually an audit tool, I've developed it into an interactive intervention instrument based on the use of the scorecard in practice. A lot of organizations use it nowadays to evaluate their communication policy and strategy and use the outcome as a starting point for their communication strategy. The administration of Flanders, for instance, did a zero measurement in January of this year, which led to 3 points for improvement that were integrated in their communications policy. And the results of the session were also presented in their annual communications report. They will repeat the measurement in January 2014 to measure improvement and define the next steps. An accountability session, like the Flemish government organized, starts with a zero measurement, which in the ideal situation takes 1 day, in which communication advisors, but also management and clients, internal clients of the communication department are invited, for instance, policymakers, and they discuss the communication strategy of the organization on the basis of the outcome of the zero measurement. It is important, and you see the ranking here, to start the accountability session by explaining the why of the session and emphasize that everyone in the organization is actually responsible for communication in and by, on behalf of the organization. The why is often explained by management to show management commitment. You really need that, because if you want to be accountable and you start a zero measurement, then you're really going to start something. In the session, the balanced scorecard method is explained to the participants, which leads to more insight about what communication really comprises. And that communication is not only about brochures and giveaways. And even more important, that it's not only the responsibility of the communication department. After that, the participants are invited to make an educated guess. And they are asked to choose 3 subjects on the poster, which I showed you before, that need improvement according to them. This will lead to a discussion about, are we doing the right things and are we doing them right? And after the educated guess, the participants fill out the questionnaires. After a short break, the results will be presented to the participants, and this will of course lead to another discussion about the results, but also the results compared to the results of the educated guess. And then it's time to define criteria to prioritize. For instance, are the points for improvement related to the organization objectives or the developments? Can we use low-hanging fruit? And especially, are the objectives attainable? For example, points for improvement of the Flanders administration were more clear positioning of brands, communication in and about government policy, and making use of research as input for quality improvement. So that's the level of improvement points. If you would like to know more about this case, please notice that Joyce de Kok is here as well. She's responsible for the evaluation of the communication policy of the Flanders administration. She's over there, maybe you can speak with her later. And last but not least, I have some do's and don'ts for you, so we can really get practical. If you start a zero measurement and you organize a session, please make sure that you know who is the owner. Somebody has to feel responsible for the measurement. So who's the boss? Maybe it sounds familiar, but in our organizations, everybody knows everything about communication. We are all experts. So if you're going to do an audit or a zero measurement, or baseline measurement, if you like, invite them. And then what do you think you're doing? Explain the why. There's no way back, because if you start measuring, then you have to do something with the results you get, of course. And then people always say, to measure is to know. Well, I would like to add a bit, because the contents and the process and the relationships are equally important during a session. And then red is not necessarily hot in measurement, because the organization's ambition is leading. For instance, if you score a subject red and it's not very important to the organization, for example, your press policy at a time at which you intend not to speak with the press, then let's not make that a priority. It's smart to be smart. I know a lot of communication people don't like to be smart in the way I mean it, but you really have to define your points for improvement as smart as you can, because otherwise you can never evaluate whether or not you've reached the goals you wanted to reach beforehand. And at last, please persist. Accountability is an ongoing process. As Rosa said, you should measure beforehand because otherwise, at the end, you don't know whether or not you made your goals. So, I would like to leave it with that. Are there?
Thank you, Cathelijne. Unless there are some clarification questions, I would then ask Laure to proceed with hers. Is there any specific question to clarify what Cathelijne has just presented? Otherwise, sorry. Voilà.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, President. I would like to felicitate, first of all, the first speaker. It's a wonderful and a very good opportunity to see how we give a little bit in short time what we have to do as expert communicators. Just for information, I and my colleague on my side, we are working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Brussels. So we try out to give the good image for Belgium abroad and inside the country, and we want to sensibilize it to the citizen. Now, I think for all of us around the table, it's very important to say that we have today the struggle for life, let me say, for the budget. So I, in my small communication department of division communicating, we don't have budget. We are only depending, let me say, from the mass structure of the organization to have budget from this side. And if possible, if you can go over to team working with Europe Direct and other local organizations, like this year for European Year of the Citizens, we started from zero. We created a website, Europol.be in Belgium, and like we say, we have success. So I would like to say, first of all, it's a question, do we need all this budget in this course? Because I don't find immediately the word back. And secondly, I can say from our side, on experience, that we, without budget, we created also something. So by acknowledge experience is always important, even if you don't have, I'm saying, you have the capacity to do something, but sometimes the budget is not there. And this is a little bit a problem, I think, not today, but also for tomorrow. Thank you.
Shall I answer it right now? If it's about the budget, and we, let's see if we can go back to the overview. If you look at effectiveness and efficiency, here are actually the questions about whether or not you've done research and pay attention to planning in your communication efforts or communication projects. To use the communication balance scorecard and organize a day, you really don't need budget because it hasn't. It's not about research at that day. It's really an interactive session, and you will get on a more strategic level an overview of improvement points. And whether or not you have budget for improvement points, that's another question, of course. But the results are not always based on just efforts of communication, because if you are going to have a zero measurement, you will see that, for instance, if the communication vision is not clearly defined, you can get management and other people around and say, okay, let's define the communication vision, in which you can, of course, incorporate the budget question. But is your question more about budget for research?
Yes.
Okay. And isn't there a research department within your organization?
Not exactly.
Okay, okay. Yeah, then you have to be smart. And there are other solutions, but yeah. Maybe that's something we can address later after the other speakers have presented their presentation. Is that okay?
Thank you very much.
Yes, may I ask, this was a very good question, but more also to launch a debate and to discuss with the others. So if someone has questions on a particular issue, very specific, that wouldn't understand or whatever, otherwise I would leave these sort of questions more for the rest, so to allow everyone to intervene on the same subject. So Laure, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. As you can see, better watch your figure. What I'm going to talk about is the fact that measurement doesn't come only at the end. I think we've already started that discussion, but it's definitely something that we, I work for Ogilvy, by the way, we certainly take into consideration when we develop communication campaigns. So it's something that you have to be doing in an ongoing mode. And there's different elements to that. It's a little bit like New Year's resolutions. People are always interested in the final result, like what's the net weight that I would like to reach in 3 months' time, or what's the body mass index number that I would like to attain. And we rarely actually reference the numbers between that. We rarely talk about the sessions with the personal trainer, how many did we do, how many calories did we reduce over the months of diet, for example. So, of course, the most important thing is the thing that you will achieve, but the one goal that you want to attain. But, of course, you're talking also about a lot of intermediate or intermediary in-between numbers. And those numbers, well, actually marketers or communicators have landed on a planet data without a map. We're now overwhelmed by numbers, and when you don't know how to make the difference between something that would be relevant to you and something that wouldn't, you could make reports and reports and reports, but they would actually never mean that you know if your communications campaign was successful or not. So you have to decide before. You have to select the data, and you have to know for what purpose you're selecting them. So not all measurement will serve to say whether the campaign was effective. Some measurement will serve to craft the campaign, actually. Some measurement items will serve to see whether the campaign is on an ongoing basis doing what it should be doing, or whether you need to fine-tune what you're organizing. And so the measures that you select will be dependent on the objective, and that's really where we want to go. And then you also know that, of course, the data are multiple. They come from different channels, not always everything at the same time. But you have to be aware that you have numbers coming from different types of activities. You have paid media, owned media, earned media, some experiences that people have with your organization, some behavioral metrics that you might want to take into account, the bigger data, the landscape in which you're operating, and some of the advocacy activities that you may have. So not every tactic is used at each step, but just in the longer term, you have to take into account all these channels that you will be using or not, maybe. Maybe you choose to be on a single channel. So how, with all these data, all these numbers, all the time, do you make your selection? Well, for us, it's actually starting with the business objective. And the business objective is something that we define at the beginning of a campaign. We have a methodology that we call Fusion, and it's actually a planning tool. And a planning tool where we start with defining the business ambition before going to the communication, because the communication will always need to serve, of course, the business ambition that an organization or a company has. So the process is actually fed through research, of course, but also client workshops, some inventories that you do within the company, expert contributions from different angles like strategy, data analysts, discipline experts in the different communication disciplines that we want to implement, and we use that system to go from planning to measurement and to reinforce next activities. So business objectives or business ambitions should always be specific, and it should always include metrics. So if you're in consumer marketing, that's easy. You take market share, you take sales numbers, you take growth, sales margin, whatever it takes, you will easily find a number. Of course, when you're in communications, and then if you're looking at public policy, you're in an area where you talk about awareness or behavior or knowledge or understanding of an issue. So it sounds less specific, but actually you can make this specifics. And you can say that your business ambition will be to bring people from a certain level to another level. For example, if we look at the elections campaign, I'm not going to commit to make a campaign that brings more voters to the voting booth at the end, because that's not my role. But what I can say is, if we do a campaign where we want to inform people and where we want people to be aware of the presence of European institutions in their lives, then maybe the My Voice Counts number is important. And we measure that because it exists in the statistics that the Parlement has at its disposal. So you have your Barometer studies from before, and you can measure that afterwards. Did that number, My Voice Counts, Did that increase? That's something that you can measure, and that's something that is tangible. And we could even put a percentage on that. I'm not going to share that with you today because we're still discussing that. But that's something that can make your communications be very measurable at the end, even if you're in a more intangible area than the marketing sales departments of a private company. And this is how, just to show you how we map this. I'm not going to go into the details, but you see that we start with the business ambition and some KPIs that are defined there. We measure business performance, and then we look at what we actually want as a response. We take intermediate measures throughout the campaign, and we base that on channel measures. So you have different levels of measurement that kind of are incorporated in the scorecards that we build for the campaigns, and we build the basics for this before we do the campaign, of course. I'd like to share a first case, because generally people come to a campaign and think, well, this is a health campaign about organ donation. And so you would come to that with an awareness raising objective. And actually, what our colleagues in Brazil did was not raise awareness, but be very specific about what they wanted to achieve. They wanted to commit the fans of a football club even more strongly than they were before. And they wanted to reduce the waiting lists for organ donation in the area of the football club. So what they did was actually look into something very specific and very measurable, and build a campaign that would bring engagement and that would lower the waiting lists for organ donation. It was a super successful campaign, and it was based on the concept of immortal fans, so that the fans that were really very committed to that club in the beginning could even go beyond that and make the club supporters always living through organ donation. So it was also a very emotional campaign, but in the same time, there were numbers fixed at the beginning, and we kind of went way beyond that. Sexy little numbers. In this section, I'd like to look at what to measure when. So there's different stages, and it's important to see that you don't measure the same things at those different stages. So short term, what you measure is the outputs of your communication activities. So the number of clicks, the number of time people spend on a video when you post it on the web, the number of press clippings that you get and the tonality of those. So it's really showing the reach and influence at the moment that you're doing a communications activity or campaign through paid or earned media. The second, the impact, is a little bit longer term. So it's the midterm effect of your campaign. It's whether awareness and attitude are influenced among citizens or target audiences. But yeah, and the outcome, that's really when you look at the longer term, the very longer term changes in behavior or attitudes that kind of deliver to the business goals that you've set in the beginning and that we said were so important. And what you measure could be either the diagnostic metrics, they're in the short-term measurement, or the KPIs. The KPIs show whether you are aligned or not to the business objectives, whether you live up to the business objective on the midterm. They provide you a top-line view of success of communication efforts, while the diagnostic metrics tell you, what do I need to adjust? If this type of Facebook post didn't work, how do I need to do another, how do I need to communicate differently? If this type of communication to the press didn't work, maybe I need to change the way I bring the message. So it's really giving you some hints at how you can reorient your campaign during the campaign. And this is, well, a reporting card as you could do it, with really all the elements that you need. This is really the diagnostics that will feed into the longer term measurement. And it's something that you have to do regularly. We try to do it either monthly or every 3 months, depending on the type of campaign that we're leading, but really to see the evolution, because that's what will give you the numbers for the interpretation of your success. And then a second case that I would like to share with you is one for the Swedish Army. When the conscription ended in Sweden, they had to shift in target audience. So the idea was not to do a widespread campaign among the whole of Sweden to raise awareness and make well, the Swedish Army look sexy with everybody, but the idea was really sorry, to focus on a certain age range, and the people that were slightly older than what they used to have as a target, which were the 18 to 21 adventure seekers. male. That was before conscription, before the end of conscription, sorry. And now they needed to see, well, men and women, world improvers, people who were actually committed to give some of their time for nothing really to help others. And so this is not about, again, a broad-scale campaign. It's really about targeting the right people with an activity that was actually to put somebody in a box somewhere, who he was filmed live, and this person could only get out if somebody else was taking his place, just spending some time to relieve someone else and waiting for the next one who would do the same thing. And the campaign was branded "Who Cares?" Really like to show that it takes something to engage yourself in the armed forces in the Swedish army. There was nothing you could do for that guy. You could watch him on a website and see what he was doing, but there's nothing you could do to get him out. So it's really bringing across that little insight and being able to measure exactly within your target group what you can do. And actually, the objective was to have about 4,000 applications for a job where you had 1,400 positions, and that was doubled with this activity. So we knew exactly where to go with the campaign, and I think it was a great success. Measurement that works is measurement that helps campaign optimization. And if you have decided on your methodology, this is really the process that you should be following with constant optimization. Sorry. And an example of that is our Mexico country reputation campaign that was actually held in more than 150 countries. And there, the measurement really provided the intelligence and the insights that you needed to support the activities that were ongoing. So it was like live measurement, live fine-tuning or live adaptation of the campaign. I think that's very important when you're trying to obtain some positive shift in sentiment, because that evolves. You can see how people react to your campaign, and you can adapt that and adjust that. So that was a campaign that was mainly done through media relations, and it was very important to get to the right message and the right audience in the right country. So that could vary from country to country. This is, of course, a kind of expensive measurement program. Not always all campaigns have to have that kind of level of program. And that brings me actually to my last bit, which is the cost of measurement and the return of measurement. And what can you get when you carry out your measurement well from the beginning to the end? Of course, it takes a bit of money. We generally say that you should allocate at least 5% of your budget to measurement. To know your audience better, to use the data to fine-tune your campaign and know which target groups are influential and which tactics work. And it also helps, and I think that's an interesting one, to allocate your marketing assets where they should be. So if you can prove throughout your campaigns that some things worked, and if you can go to your hierarchy or your managers and say, well, this worked, and this worked because of these and these and these numbers, and you have really tangible results of your campaign, then you will maybe also find it easier to allocate some budget to that, because it's something that Cathelijne was saying too. The difficult thing is to convince other people who are not in communications that you're actually reaching some results that are feeding into the business objective that I was talking about before. So it's a very important tool also to talk to management. And in business, I mean, we know that the management, for example, is very short term, and smarter measurement can also help marketing professionals speak the boardroom language. There's no reason why it wouldn't be the same thing with other organizations. I think it always convinces when you have numbers. And I wanted to show you also this case, which is the GNOME experiment. It's a B2B campaign, so it's about a very little known gravity phenomenon and a traveling garden gnome. Don't ask me how this came to life. But so what we had is a company that was making some very specific measurement products, precision measurement products, and they wanted to be more known with people who were leading laboratories or technicians working in laboratories or so in a very specific discipline. And there, the ambition and the business objective was increasing sales. But they did it in a very smart way, because they used that thing that people didn't know, which was that gravity on Earth is different in different places. And so it's a very tiny difference, and you need some very precise measurement for that. So they actually sent around that case that you see here with the little gnome and some scales, a set of scales, to measure that. And it actually traveled all over the world, and a lot of scientists and laboratory technicians used this and reported on the difference in gravity that you had in the different areas. And this little creative idea actually really led to a jump in sales, and the ROI jumped from more than 1,000% in 2 weeks. So it's sometimes you know exactly where you want to go, sometimes you're surprised by your results, but it's always good, of course, to know beforehand that this was meant for sales and not for awareness again, or not for, I mean, the idea was not to make those people know about this difference. That was just the gimmick that we used and the twist that we used to get people interested and talking about it. And other lessons from measurement, and that's from a study that we did, is that you can see exactly what helps sell, for example, or what helps communicate your campaign. We know that fame sells, we know that emotions sell, and you can really demonstrate a difference when you talk to people around you, or to the people that you need to convince about the channels or the choices you make in communications campaign. We know that multi-channel sells, but to a certain extent, because once you go beyond the 3 channels, it's getting confusing and maybe difficult to manage. So these are all things that you can learn from measurement. The what if no campaign, or the what if a campaign is not going well, how can you actually change that? So it's really helping you see whether you can improve and address differences or unexpected results of your campaign. So for us, the most valuable communicators of the future will be those who embrace statistics to validate sound instincts, because of course we all know as communicators that we live a little bit on instincts, and that we just have to work with the numbers, because that will help us actually keep our position strong in the organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laure. Thank you very much. Is there any clarification question? Yes, please.
Axel Heyer from the Liberals in the European Parliament. I haven't understood the last chart, what is defined the X and the Y coordinator.
This one?
Yeah.
This one? Sorry. Well, the horizontal axis is the time, so the number, the months that you're campaigning, and this is how do you say that? A scale of 10 in terms of sales. So it's not giving real numbers, because it's not one campaign. It's just indicating how things. If sales go down at a certain point, if you start a campaign, you can bring them actually up, and if you had done no campaign, it would just continue to go down. Possibly, it's not a concrete example. It's just an aggregated slide to show that you can really see in the curves how you can change things.
Okay. Any other clarification? Otherwise, I will ask Kevin to take the floor for the last presentation.
Great, good morning everybody. Thank you for attending. I see some old friends and new acquaintances. I should mention, thank you Rosette for the introduction. When we talk about the European Commission funded evaluations and feasibility studies that I work through an organisation called the European Policy Evaluation Consortium, and I think one of my colleagues over there, Astrid Hensen, is here from there as well, so she can always answer all the technical questions that I can't, because I always say when it comes to evaluation that I write the words and somebody else does the maths. So if anybody wants to ask me anything complex mathematically, I'd ask you to wait until I've got my mathematician friend by my side, because I won't be able to answer it, having been declared mathematically incompetent at the age of 16. Nevertheless, I've managed to survive, and it just goes to show you can run a business even if you can't do algorithms. So my session is about money, something close to my heart. I'm sure it's close to many of you, and in particular to your organisations. I did a lot of work when I worked for the UK government in the Central Office of Information on return on marketing investment, ROMI, in the public sector. And in fact, just the last speaker on some of her slides showed some slides which came from a chap called Les Binet. In fact, I worked with Les Binet on writing the document on return on marketing investment. I do recommend his books on accountability and marketing. They are the kind of leading books on it, and also we can make available to you the papers that we wrote on return on marketing investment in the public sector, which are unique still, I understand, and they are available online as well, so we can make those available to you. So it's about money, and it's coincidental that this week the UK's Executive Director of Government Communication, Alex Aitken, and the Minister responsible for government communication, Francis Maud, made a significant announcement, significant to us in the UK, that on the further stages in the reform of government communication, how it is organised. And high on that list of reforms was evaluation, and the fact that it is now policy that evaluation is mandatory for all UK government campaigns. There was a lot of interest in evaluation, there still is, but a lot of people were finding ways around it when it was inconvenient to do evaluations, but this has now been made mandatory as part of a central oversight of communication. Yesterday, when we were talking about policy and communication, our colleagues from the Netherlands was talking about the way in which it's structured there, and I would suggest that, having done a study on how communication is organised across the world in governments, I would suggest that the UK, whether it is intending to or not, is moving slightly towards the pattern of structure in the Netherlands. So there is a major ministerial announcement and evaluation being declared as mandatory, very high on the list. This extends the pre-approval process that happens in the UK. Any expenditure on communication campaigns over £100,000, and in fact, in practice, a lot of those below £100,000 have to go in front of something called the Efficiency and Reform Group at the Cabinet Office. And those plans have to include measurement and evaluation. And those plans, those submissions for permission to run that campaign are rejected quite often because the quality of measurement and the degree of monetization of the benefit and the payback is not there. And so those plans are rejected, they go back to the ministry and they say, sorry, one black mark against you, could do better, come back and teacher will mark them again a bit later on. So it's already embedded as part of the culture. However, actually making sure those evaluations are done at the end has not necessarily had the same strength as it will do now. By the way, I should say incidentally, and this may upset an awful lot of you, but hey, that's what I'm here for. And that is raising awareness. I'm not going to do that. Oh, I did it. But raising awareness is not an acceptable objective in communication. Okay, sorry to sound like the teacher again, but it simply doesn't mean anything. It is a step on a pathway to some form of change in behaviour, change in action, change in stance, whatever it may be. It isn't, it's like saying, let's get press coverage. Why? Raising awareness doesn't actually at the end of the day, you can measure it and you can say it costs us X and Y, that's fine, but only as a step on the way to something that is actually a smart, as has been referred to, objective. So, having got that off my chest, sorry, I have to do my breathing exercises now. Out with hate, in with love. Out with hate, in with love. Okay, fine, I'm all right now. So, now we move on to the kind of, little bit of charts and things, just to show that we've all done some work. This is the chart that we use in the UK to describe the measurement and evaluation process. And it defines, because the terminology is often quite confused as to what are inputs, what are outputs, what are outtakes, what are outcomes at the end of the day. And so we've defined it in terms of the inputs, that's the activity that's carried out. The outputs, who have you reached, how often did you reach them, and what are therefore the number of impacts, the number of times you've hit your target audience. Winston Churchill used to say that if you wanted to get the public to do something or understand something, you had to get a big hammer and hit them over the head with it. And then you had to take an even bigger hammer and hit them over the head again. And then if you really wanted to get through to them, you had to get an even bigger hammer and really seriously bash them over the head, and then you might have had a chance of at least attracting their attention. Well, in this term, when we measure reach and frequency, we multiply reach and frequency, we come to something called impacts, the number of times you impact those people. Opportunities to see, those of us in kind of marketing advertising will recognise as a phrase. So, do people know, therefore, what's they're taking out of your communication? How many people were aware? Did they recognise it, recall your messages? What did they think? How many people understood? Now, this is one of the things we're quite bad at, by the way. Because when people talk about storytelling and narratives, they often just sit there and write the narrative from their own little perspective. Yeah, we've all seen this. And they write it from their own perspective. They don't write it from the perspective of the audience. And then they don't measure whether the audience has understood it. And we have an old expression in the UK about the kind of message going back from the front line in the military, where somebody says, send a message, passes a message by word of mouth and says, tell them to send reinforcements, we're going to advance. And by the time it gets to the general, somebody says to him, they're saying from the front line, we should send reinforcements, we're going to advance. It's kind of like, how did you receive the message? You've got to make sure that you can measure how it's received, understood or not understood. How do people feel about things? Do they do something about it? Now we're into intermediate outcomes. Do they talk to their friends about it? Do you have to have buzz monitoring to see whether it's moving around the social media? Have they actually done something like logged on to a website or put their name into something, requested a pack, whatever it may be? What are those intermediate actions that you've asked them to do? And if they haven't taken them, what were the barriers? And then the final outcomes. Actually, what were the verified final outcomes of the activity? Did you change behaviour? If you did change behaviour, what was the value of that changed behaviour? In the UK, we have a set of calculations set up by our Department for Transport, which is used across government, about the value of a life, or actually, technically, the value of a death. If a death in a traffic accident or death in a fire, etc., it comes to over £1 million. Serious injuries, about £150,000, etc. And it's an accepted metric approved by our National Audit Office that you can use to say, actually we saved 15 lives. Ergo, we've just saved the government X or Y. There's an interesting calculation, by the way, with regards to smoking cessation, because smokers cost our National Health Service £500 for every year that they live. Unfortunately, that sounds wonderful. We can stop them smoking and we can save the National Health Service £500 a year. Problem. Smokers pay the government £1,000 a year in tax. So you can spend an awful lot of money, but at the end of the day, is it to not to the benefit of the exchequer, but it is to the benefit of society. So what I would just say with this is that it's often the process of going through here that's important, that throws up for you in your planning those activities that are going to be most valuable to you, those activities that are most worthwhile, those activities that are going to be financially give you the best payback. So it's the process that's worth doing. Sometimes it also helps you to defend yourself and your budgets against what you might call ego campaigns, which the minister wants to do. Because you can take them through the process and say, well, at the end of the day, Minister, I'm afraid that this won't give the results that we might expect. And by the way, would you like the National Audit Office to be coming and knocking on your door and telling you that you've misspent the money? Sometimes you can get away with it that way. We have had in the past, in our country and many other countries I've visited, I've worked, or all across Europe and indeed elsewhere, one of the biggest problems that communications directors have is the minister who wants to run a campaign for their own ego, because it makes them feel good. It makes them think that everybody's going to love them. Or they want to prove that they should go up in ministerial posts or whatever it may be. And those, what we call vanity campaigns, are some of the most difficult ones to fight. But if you have process, you can at least do something about it. I just said you can calculate things. Value for money on the top right there. Look at the inputs, look at the cost of the activity, work out what the value for money. Here you can use benchmarks of the market costs and the quality standards, things like this, to actually see whether or not you're getting good value for money. Then the outputs, when outputs, outtakes and intermediate outcomes, you can calculate in terms of what we call cost per result. More of that in a second. And then the final outcomes, the number achieving it, and you can work out from there return on marketing investment. So, cost per thousands. You can show cost per results. Breaking your campaign down, you can look at how much did it cost to reach that 1,000 members of our target audience, and work out a cost per thousand. And there are benchmarks, and there are, in the advertising marketing world, there are accepted benchmarks of what those cost per thousands should and could be. In fact, sometimes you see publications. I have a big problem, by the way, with publications. There's far too many of them. You cut down trees and use petrochemicals to make them, and there's so many of them that they're, basically at the end of the day, the European Quarter in Luxembourg and Coachman Plateau, it's not really a natural geographical thing. They found all the publications that hadn't been distributed and just piled them together, grassed them over and built buildings on them. But you do find that how many thousand to actually, and did they get there to those people? Or did they sit in some office or under some place? Because if they haven't been distributed, then you can't work out the cost per thousand for them. And when you find sometimes that you've printed 100,000 copies, but only 5,000 of them have been distributed, then you can only work out the cost on those 5,000 being distributed against the total cost of all the publications. So cost per thousand. Cost per percentage change in a particular preference, which requires research to find out whether people have changed their preference or the intention to act, etc. Again, through market research or opinion research. Things like cost per click, click through, cost per share or cost per like in the social media, all good stuff. We can't do payment by results in that area because, of course, we're not sort of selling products, although I have done quite a lot of work on payment by results for government communications. And it's quite possible to go quite far in negotiating payment by results with suppliers. Some of the people here, you know, who are suppliers might, you know, get a bit worried by that, but actually it is possible to negotiate it. Cost per uptake, of course, and then in the end, the cost per fulfillment. A fulfillment is, for example,